Welcome back to another awesome episode of Filling in the History. I am the amateur historian. Glad you're sticking with us, and thank you for your comments out there. One of the comments that I've been receiving, which is I think a very good point, is, am I going to cover this or that or the other thing? And the answer is yes. I'm just hoping to do it in chronological order. So I hear you, and we're going to keep at it that way. Today we're actually going to be going over sections 94 through 97. And 94, they thought was done in like 3 months previous to this in May of 1833, when in reality it was actually after section 97. So, you know what? Double check your work before you publish something. But this is one of those examples of where the Joseph Smith Papers has clarified history for the church as a whole, which is kind of fun. But we got a lot to get into today. So we're just going to go for it. This is going to be a major turning point in church history. We're talking about building the city of Zion. We're talking about building a temple in Kirtland. And we're talking about major, what I would consider in today's terms, highly illegal activity against the members of the church, where they were kicked out of land that they owned. That was never, no reparations were ever made for that. So we kind of call that a wash. But a lot of this kind of stuff is what we're going to dive into today. So I'm going to be going fast through some of these things, but here we go. Now, the sections are going to be out of order, as I said. We're going to do 95, 96, 97, and then 94 with a lot of stuff in between. And the first thing we're going to go after is a very odd little segment that I love. And I will say this, what we're going to be talking about today, which is out of Documents Volume 3, is one of the main reasons why I have always wanted to podcast or do episodes or lecture or teach the Joseph Smith Papers. So you're going to get to one of the main points for me personally of why I did this. And here's one. These are fragments of the plan for the house of the Lord. The handwriting is of Frederick G. Williams on the back of these papers. And what are we looking at? You might look at this and say, these are not temple plans. Well, if you look at it, it's on the back of this papyri from the book of Abraham. So for those of you who don't know, there are these facsimiles that show up in the book of Abraham. This is the papyri that actually shows them. And what they did is they actually wrote up temple plans, and then they used that paper as more or less a pasteboard for the Egyptian papyri. So we get two for the price of one. Now, this is held in the Church History Library. But basically, they took this piece of paper that was big enough, and they pasted the facsimiles of the book of Abraham on top of it. So you can actually see here the original hieroglyphics and the original letters and language on top of, as you can see here, the drawings of the interior of the house of the Lord in Kirtland. So a very, very fascinating thing. When I first did this, I was like, oh, I clicked on the wrong thing. No, that's the way it is. Page 3 is the most obvious. But the sections are, the segments are actually drawn out on the other pages. So even though you may not be able to see them. So a little bit of a source note behind this, which is what's fun. We get this from the source note of Documents Volume 3. It says, the plan of the house of the Lord in Kirtland was cut into irregular sizes to fit, preserve, and protect pieces of the Egyptian papyrus sometime after Joseph Smith acquired the papyri in July of 1835, about 2 years later, and likely before July of 1840. Sometime before his death, Joseph Smith gave the Egyptian papyri, as well as the Egyptian mummies he had acquired, to his mother, Lucy Mack Smith. Shortly after Lucy Mack Smith's death, in May of 1856, Emma Smith, her husband Louis C. Bideman, and her son Joseph Smith III sold 4 Egyptian mummies, the papyrus fragments, and other papyrus rolls to Abel Combs. Combs separated the Egyptian artifacts and sold some of the rolls to mummies and some of the fragments to the St. Louis Museum. The St. Louis Museum then sold them to the Chicago Museum, which was later purchased by Joseph H. Wood, who changed the name of the museum to Wood's Museum in Chicago. Take that. Wood's Museum was destroyed by fire in 1871. Combs maintained possession of some of the fragments and possibly the other 2 mummies, which eventually passed to Edward and Alice Hauser. In 1947, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City purchased the papyri fragments from Edward Hauser. Aziz Y. Ativa uncovered the fragments in a collection of Egyptian documents housed in the Metropolitan Museum and helped transfer ownership of these fragments to the LDS Church in November of 1967. The Egyptian papyrus fragments are now preserved as one collection at the Church History Library. What a journey. And, again, this is 1833, so it's not like we have paper all over the place, or 1835, maybe I should say. And so they took these plans that they had, which apparently they didn't really use, cut them up and used them as pasteboards. And that's how they are to this day. And of course, they're not going to separate those out. It would ruin and tear them. So I thought that was very fascinating. So the historical introduction that the documents, Volume 3, adds to this, these are from the editors of the Joseph Smith papers. It says, the documents featured here are 4 fragments of a drawing of the interior floor plans of the house of the Lord, or temple, that was to be built in Kirtland, Ohio. Frederick G. Williams likely drew the plans in June of 1833, as they are similar to the plans of the house of the Lord he drew and sent to Independence, Missouri that same summer. The original drawing was later cut into pieces, which were used as backings to preserve 4 pieces of Egyptian papyrus owned by Joseph Smith. Sections of the original drawing are visible on some of the rectos and versos of these backings. The sketches on the existing 4 fragments featured here reflect the early planning stages for building the house of the Lord in Kirtland. So where do these plans actually come from? Like, what was their sort of inspiration behind this? We get this a little further into the historical introduction. In early June of 1833, a conference of high priests began drafting construction plans and adhering to the instructions of the 1st of June revelation. Appointed 3 men, Joseph Smith, Sidney Rigdon, and Frederick G. Williams, who together constituted the presidency of the high priesthood, as those to whom God should show the manner in which the temple was to be built. According to a reminiscent account from Truman Angell, shortly after receiving this appointment, the 3 men had a vision in which they were shown, quote, the plan or model of the house to be built, unquote. Williams likely drew the architectural plan featured here soon after this experience. Now, we're going to get into a little bit more of what that experience was. But technically speaking, according to this account, the plans that you are looking at here were given by a vision to these 3 men. A very fun story that I've heard before that's really great about this from the historical introduction. The conference also counseled the committee to proceed immediately to commence building the house or obtaining material, stone, brick, lumber, etc. Hyrum Smith recorded in his diary under the date of June 7th, quote, this day commenced making preparation for the building of the house of the Lord, unquote. These preparations included digging trenches for the structure's foundation. To begin excavating for the foundation, the members of the building committee would have needed to know the size of the building. They apparently learned these measurements from the 1st of June revelation, which indicated the building should be 55 feet wide, a measurement that matches the drawing on fragment 2. The committee likely used Williams' drawings, of which the fragments featured here are a part, to begin construction on the house of the Lord in June of 1833. So basically, Hyrum Smith heard, like, oh, we're going to build a temple, and here's the dimensions. And he went out there with a shovel and started digging right away. And I just kind of love that story. That's just a guy that's like, let's do it. Don't think about it. Go and do it. We're going to dig it. I love that story. Further into the historical introduction we get, given the instructions and news found in this letter, the Kirtland leaders almost certainly had both interior and exterior drawings of the Kirtland house of the Lord, with sufficient details to support the start of construction before the 25th of June. No known evidence exists of later revisions to the plans, though they were possibly revised as late as August of 1833, when Joseph Smith, Williams, and other Kirtland leaders revised the plans for the Independence house of the Lord. And we're going to be getting to that a little later in this episode. So a footnote for all of this says, by fall of 1833, the trenches for the foundation of the house of the Lord had been dug 4 to 5 feet deep. The stone foundation had been completed, and some girders were in place to support the floor. When Ira Ames arrived in Kirtland around the beginning of October of 1833, he, quote, found the saints had begun to build the temple there. It was raised up to the 1st floor, unquote. Construction in Kirtland temporarily halted in late June and late of 1833 and early 1834 because of a lack of building materials and because of a new priority to gather means to pay off debts and help relieve church members in Jackson County. This was from mob activity. Construction on the house of the Lord in Kirtland resumed in the spring of 1834 and proceeded slowly until its completion in 1836. So Hyrum started it, and they kept going. And then they had to stop because they ran out of lumber and stone and so forth. All right, so that is a very interesting thing of like these plans being pasted onto the papyri of the Book of Abraham facsimile. So something you may or may not have known. The next thing we get in the timeline here is some minutes from the 1st of June. And this is a man, and his first name is Doctor. Okay, his name is Dr. Philastus Hurlbut. Was accused of unchristian conduct with the female sex while on a mission to the east. Yikes. His commission was revoked, and he was excommunicated. So there's that. Next item of business on this docket was the dimension or size of the house to be built in Kirtland. Joseph receives a revelation, given the dimensions, and Sidney and Frederick are supposed to draw it out. So Joseph does that. That's in the revelation that we're about to get to. And then Sidney and Frederick are supposed to start drawing the whole thing out. And so that's that meeting. You excommunicate somebody and talk about building a temple. Next thing we get in the timeline is section 95, as we have it in the Doctrine and Covenants today. So, and this meeting where the dimensions were given, like I said, are this revelation. So the minutes I just read equal this section as part of that. So let's talk about it. The earliest copy we get is from Revelation Book 2. It is the handwriting of Orson Hyde. He's still in the driver's seat of this one. It's a very clean copy. We also get one in Revelation Book 1, which John Whitmer wrote, and there's a little flourish about how we write Kirtland. Thank you, John. Love your little flourishes. They look great. And it is actually called Section 95 in the original Doctrine and Covenants. So the unity has happened, the whatever you want to call it. They have come together finally. We match up. Not that it matters at all, but I thought that was notable. Anyway, we also get a copy in the manuscript history of the church. So the circumstantial introduction behind this. The earliest thing that we get is Kirtland, June 1st, 1833. Again, matches the meeting we just talked about. Revelation Book 1 adds the word revelation with fancy lettering. Thank you, John. And that's about it. And the same thing is in the Doctrine and Covenants. The manuscript history gives us a letter received from Hyrum, Reynolds, and Jared. They're kind of the building committee, and which they're kind of explaining, sort of their, and this is a little off topic, but it's kind of their progress made so far on what they've done with the Kirtland House of the Lord. And then it says, the same day I received the following. So that's the only introduction to the revelation that you get. Historical introduction gives us a lot more. It says, talking about these, the letter that it got, it says, on the 4th of May, nearly 4 months after Joseph Smith wrote about the urgent need to build the house, a committee was formed to raise funds for the building's construction. A conference unanimously voted that a committee consisting of Hyrum Smith, Jared Carter, and Reynolds Cahoon be formed to raise the money. Nearly a month later, neither this committee nor other church leaders had taken any steps towards constructing the building. So, you might have guessed, a chiding is in order, so we get this from the historical introduction. The revelation featured here, dictated on the 1st of June, stated that church leaders' unresponsiveness to the call to build this religious structure would halt the growth and spiritual work of the church. The revelation also specified the building's dimensions and directed the manner in which church members should construct it. Immediately following this revelation, a conference of high priests discussed the revelation and began drafting construction plans. The conference appointed Joseph Smith, Sidney Rigdon, and Frederick G. Williams, the presidency of the high priesthood, to serve as the planning committee, which was responsible for obtaining, quote, a draft or construction of the inner court of the house, unquote. So, further into the historical introduction, we get, likely in response to this revelation, the building committee, which still comprised Hyrum Smith, Jared Carter, and Reynolds Cahoon, prepared a circular for the members of the church that same day, writing that they had been officially charged with soliciting subscriptions to establish a fund to build the house. Quote, unless we fulfill this command, viz. Establish an house, they warned, and prepare all things necessary whereby the elders may gather into a school called the School of the Prophets and receive that instruction that the Lord designs they should receive. we may all despair of obtaining the great blessing that God has promised to the faithful of the Church of Christ, unquote. The circular reiterated the promise found on the 2nd of January, 1831, Revelation, a long time ago, that God would endow individuals with, quote, power from on high, unquote, which they could gain from that instruction that the Lord designs in the school of the prophets. The committee encouraged church members to, quote, make every possible exertion to aid temporally as well as spiritually in this great work that the Lord is bringing about and is about to accomplish, unquote. The circular also called for church members to pay their subscriptions and to send the funds to Kirtland by the 1st of September, 1833. Hyrum Smith, Reynolds Cahoon, and others began construction on the multi-purpose House of the Lord by June of 1833. The House of the Lord, completed in 1836, eventually served as both a school and a place of worship. It was the church's first temple. So let's get into the content and footnotes of this. The Revelation gives us this. It says, "Ye have sinned against me, a very grievous sin, in that ye have not considered the great commandment in all things that I have given unto you concerning the building of mine house, for the preparation wherewith I deign to prepare mine apostles, to prune my vineyard for the last time, that I may bring to pass my strange act, that I may pour out my spirit upon all flesh." Okay. Footnote 6 to this says, to see Isaiah 28:21, and then gives, according to Oliver Cowdery, the angel Moroni told Joseph Smith that God had, quote, chosen you as an instrument in his hand to bring to light that which shall perform his act, his strange act, to bring to pass a marvelous work and a wonder, unquote. So the strange act, this idea that once the temple's built, that the missionaries can go out and pour out Spirit upon everybody, I guess. So that's what we get from that. So who are we talking about here? Let's get into the Revelation a little bit more here. It says, "Therefore, I command you to tarry even as mine apostles at Jerusalem. Nevertheless, my servants sinned a very grievous sin, and contentions arose in the school of the prophets, which was very grievous unto me, saith your Lord. Therefore, I sent them forth to be chastened." Okay, who's that? The footnote for this says, "Extant records offer no information on the nature of this contention or its consequences. Several men, some of whom attended the school of the prophets, were called to serve missions in late March, about the time that the first school of the prophets ended." So we don't really know who he's referring to here. So this is one of those things that's maybe just never happened or is now lost to us. Further into the text, we get, "Here is wisdom and the mind of the Lord. Let the house be built not after the manner of this world, for I give not unto you that you shall live after the manner of the world. Therefore let it be built after the manner which I shall show unto thee, of you whom ye shall appoint to ordain unto this power." Footnote 16 for this says, "According to an architectural study of the Kirtland Temple, the building was unlike other churches built around the same time, especially in its use of interior space and pulpits. The Kirtland Temple also incorporated contemporaneous architectural styles with an eclectic mixture of Gregorian, Federal, Greek Revival, and Gothic elements." So this is a very unique, very original designed building. So the details of the building are actually found in the Revelation itself, and this is where the minutes were saying this is where they got it from. So it says, "Therefore let it be built after the manner which I shall show unto 3 of you, whom ye shall appoint and ordain unto this power, and the size thereof shall be 50 feet in width, and shall be 60 feet in length in the inner court thereof. And let the lower part of the inner court thereof be dedicated unto me for your sacrament offering, and for your preaching and your fasting and your praying, and the offering up your most holy desires unto me, saith your Lord. Let the higher part of the inner court be dedicated unto me for the school of mine apostles." Now, I'm going to get into my opinion on this in a moment, but I wanted to share 2 footnotes that I find very interesting. Footnote 18 for this says, "At a conference held in early June 1833, Joseph Smith, Sidney Rigdon, and Frederick G. Williams were appointed to, quote, obtain a draft or construction of the inner court of the house," unquote. Reportedly, Williams later said that the 3 men were shown by revelation, quote, "the plan or model of the house to be built. We went upon our knees," he remembered, called on the Lord, and the building appeared within viewing distance. I being the first to discover it, then all of us viewed it together. After we had taken a good look at the exterior, the building seemed to come right over us, and the makeup of this hall seems to coincide with what I there saw to a minutia, unquote. Several weeks later, the presidency sent plans for a similar structure to church leaders in Missouri with the counsel that, quote, should you not understand the explanations sent with the drafts, so as you may have a proper understanding, for it is meet that all things should be done according to the pattern, unquote. On the actual draft, Williams wrote, quote, for your satisfaction, we inform you that the size, form, and dimensions of the house were given us of the Lord, unquote. We also get this from footnote 22. It says, School of Mine Apostles is another name for the School of the Prophets, just so that you know. Now, this is all awesome. So we get this sort of interactive vision where these three men, apparently Frederick G. Williams sees it. He's like, hey, there's a building over there. And they all look and they see it. And they get like this sort of, they can kind of see, really get a good look at it. And then for somehow they gets kind of placed on top of them and they get to see the inner side of it. And they use that to build the plans, according to their story. Now, I just wanted to emphasize something here that I think is a very interesting thing that we don't talk about very much. And this is an opinion by myself, based on everything that I've read in the Joseph Smith papers and other things. I believe that the Kirtland Temple is actually not a temple. I believe it was called a house of the Lord for a reason. And the reason is, if you read in the actual Revelation itself, it says that the lower court is for the sacrament offering and preaching and fasting and, prayers. And the upper court is supposed to be a school for the prophets. So in no place do we have ordinance rooms. We don't have a font. We don't have anything for any ordinance except for the sacrament. Now, if you talk about going to a building where you have the sacrament, and then you have places to have rooms for classwork and teaching, you're going to be talking about a chapel. And so I am of the opinion, this is my opinion as just somebody who's read a little, I believe that what we are actually given here in Kirtland is a pattern for chapels that we still use to this day. We have a rostrum, we have a place for a sacrament meeting, we have a place for classroom instruction. And these things are separated by veils. We call them those plastic partitions, but in essence, they are veils, and we'll get to that in a moment. So I would admonish you, if you are a member of the church, think differently about your chapels, because they may be a lot more important than we're saying. Because the temple, as we know it today, was patterned after the Nauvoo temple. That is something that I would consider a temple today, where we still kind of call our chapels houses of the Lord. I'm going to include tabernacles on that. I'm going to include stake centers on that. This is my personal belief, but I believe very strongly that what we're actually looking at here is a chapel. Thus, the revelation ends. Let's stop talking about me and let's talk about something else. The revelation ends this way. It says, thus saith the son Amen. Remember that? A little Adamic language there. Son Amen, or in other words, Alphas, or in other words, Omegas, even Jesus Christ your Lord. Amen. That's how the revelation ends. Footnote 24 gives an interesting insight. It says, nowhere in the Greek transliterations or standard English translations of the Bible or in other Joseph Smith revelations do the plural words Alphas and Omegas appear in place of a singular Alpha and Omega. Take that as you will, but apparently it's referring to more than one rather than just a singular individual. Don't know what that entirely means, so I'll leave it to that. All right, part one. Some wacky stuff so far, and a little bit of opinion from yours truly. But stick around. We're going to be moving on into other sections of the Doctrine and Covenants and some heavy topics as we move forward in church history.